I flew to Florida and found my son dying while my daughter-in-law partied. After 4 decades of serving my country with discipline and honor, all I wanted was to return home and reunite with my son. I had dreamed of that moment for years, counting the days until I could hug him and tell him how much he had always been my greatest reason for living. But when I finally arrived, I found a deafening silence, a screaming absence, and a truth that would knock me off my feet. My journey back home turned into something much bigger than I imagined. Today my story is about courage, pain, justice, and a mother's love that even death couldn't silence. I am so happy to have you here with me. Follow along to the end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story will reach. As accustomed as I was to returning from missions, no farewell was as symbolic as that one. I hung up my uniform with the same care with which I stored memories of battles and losses. The plane landed in Florida under a clear sky, as if the world was welcoming me back. My heart pounded, not from the tension of duty, but from the anticipation of seeing Mark, my only son. It was like returning home after an eternity of absence. Every step I took towards the arrival gate brought me closer to the life I dreamed of resuming. Memories of his childhood flashed through my mind, his first day of school, the hug after his father's death, silent Christmases. We hadn't seen each other in months, but I hoped that one look would rekindle our bond. I imagined him waiting for me with flowers, perhaps a shy smile. But the gate was empty, silent, with no one waiting for me. I tried to rationalize, maybe traffic, maybe a mishap. I called, sent a message, but got no response. I took a taxi with my suitcase on my lap and a tight chest, hoping to find him at home, perhaps embarrassed by his absence. The route was familiar, but there was something strange about the landscape. The stores were there, the lampposts too, but something bothered me. I looked out the window with heightened attention, as if something in the scenery was out of place. But something in the familiar landscape seemed wrong. Arriving on Mark Street, a shiver ran through me. The white fence, always well maintained, was now peeling. The house, once vibrant, seemed suffocated by time. Drawn curtains, faded paint, absent footsteps. The mailbox was overflowing, and newspapers on the lawn indicated weeks of neglect. There was an oppressive silence in the air, as if the house had been forgotten by everyone, including him. Nothing there resembled the home he had built with such love. I got out of the car feeling my heart heavy. Every detail screamed neglect. The stained door, the doormat covered in dry leaves, weeds taking over the entrance. I pressed the doorbell, but the sound that came back was my own anxiety. I knocked on the door, called for him, walked around the house, all in vain. Through the window I saw the empty living room, the disheveled sofa, the lights off. Something was definitely wrong, and I could no longer ignore the signs. I searched the porch for any note, any warning, any indication of his planned absence. Nothing. Only abandonment. Neighbors began to peek through their blinds, and that's when I realized I wasn't just a visitor. I was an intruder in a tragedy that had already begun. With each passing second, the uneasiness turned into anguish. I needed to know where he was, and why his house seemed to have been left to die with him. The tall grass and overflowing mailbox seemed like a silent scream. It was Evelyn, the neighbor across the street, who opened the door with sad, hesitant eyes. Seeing me, her expression dissolved into a silent lament. "Elizabeth, you didn't know?" she asked carefully, as if holding a bomb in her hands. My throat tightened before I could answer. She told me everything in fragments, like someone still trying to digest the pain. Mark had been hospitalized for weeks, and no family members had shown up since then. He was alone. My mind refused to believe. What do you mean hospitalized? Alone? And Jennifer? Wasn't she the love of his life? Evelyn hesitated, looked around, and simply said, "She disappeared." The ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet. I asked for the hospital name and left without thinking, without breathing. My son, my only son, was on the verge of death, and I was miles away while he fought for his life with no one by his side. The taxi could barely keep up with the speed of my thoughts. The world spun in slow motion as the hospital approached. Memories of little Mark, sick, asking me to stay by his side, haunted me. Now I didn't even know if there was still time. Every traffic light seemed like a barrier between me and the truth. I had to get there. I had to see with my own eyes what they had hidden from me. I rushed to the hospital with my heart in my throat. Nothing prepared me to see my son in that bed, unrecognizable. The smell of the hospital hit me like a punch to the gut. That mix of alcohol and defeated hope. A doctor attended to me with a tired expression, like someone who had repeated that speech many times. He said Mark was in an advanced stage of multiple organ failure, a consequence of cancer discovered too late. My legs weakened and all I could ask was, "Does he know I'm here?" The doctor just nodded with a sorrow that broke me. I was led to the room with the sensation of living something out of body. My son, the boy I cradled on feverish nights, was there. Pale skin, hollow eyes, a body reduced to what remained of the struggle. I sat by the bed and took his hand, trying to hold back my tears so as not to scare him. The words fled, but my heart spoke for me. He opened his eyes with effort, and for an instant, I felt time bend to our reunion. I touched his face with my fingertips, as if wanting to memorize every feature. Mark smiled weakly and murmured, "Mommy, you came back." My voice came out shaky, laden with pain and regret. "I'll never leave again, my love." He tried to say something more, but exhaustion overcame him. The nurse motioned for me to let him rest, but before I moved away, he looked at me one more time and something inside me broke. Two weakened eyes recognized me for the first time in years. I returned to the hospital the next morning with a lump in my throat. I knew without anyone having to say it that time was against us. I sat by his side again, holding his hand as if I could prevent him from leaving. He mumbled something and with effort said, "I love you, Mom." My heart exploded in tears. Before I could answer, the monitor beeped. The nurse rushed in. The doctor entered. And in a second the world turned silent. The continuous sound of the monitor cut through my soul like no battlefield ever had. "No!" I screamed, but my voice seemed to have no strength against reality. I held his inert body, wishing to wake up from that nightmare. No one would tear me away from him at that moment. The tears didn't come to my eyes, they came to my chest, like a hurricane trapped by decades of emotional armor. Mark left in my arms as at the beginning of life. And now, at the end, I was allowed to stay there for a few more minutes. Only after kissing his cold forehead did I realize. The real pain was not death itself, but the lost time, the silence imposed by so many years of distance. The nurse left an envelope with his belongings, cell phone, key, wallet, a picture of me. I left the hospital with no certain destination, only the certainty that this pain would be eternal. And yet I knew, I needed to go back to his house. A long beep cut the air and my world stopped. The key seemed to weigh tons when I put it in the lock. I entered and was overcome by an overwhelming emptiness. Mark's house was not just a physical place. It was the last vestige of everything he built, dreamed, and was. The lights off, the faint smell of mold, the shoes thrown around. Every corner seemed frozen in time. I carefully picked up his objects, as if touching them was invading his intimacy. Even now, nothing had been moved since his departure. I sat on the sofa and stared at the silence. But it wasn't ordinary silence. It was one that screamed. I looked around and felt that there was something beyond sadness. Small details disturbed me. The absence of pictures on the wall, half-open drawers, displaced objects. That house didn't seem abandoned just by Mark's absence, but as if someone had gotten rid of what they wanted to hide. A new anguish began to form in my chest. I got up and went to the hallway, observing each room like someone looking for a ghost. The master bedroom seemed too tidy, too cold and personal. I went to the office but stopped at the door. Something there made me hesitate. I took a deep breath, as if preparing for another fight, and entered. That house held secrets. And now I needed to confront them for him. And for me. The silence of the house echoed louder than any gunshot in the field. Something inside here was wrong. Very wrong. I spent the next morning going through Mark's house, starting with the rooms he liked best. The office, once his creative sanctuary, was a mess. Papers haphazardly piled, books out of order, files half open. This was not typical of him. Mark was always meticulous with his projects and personal spaces. This caused me an uneasiness difficult to name. I opened the drawers slowly, as if they might bite me. I found old cards, photographs of us, some important correspondence. But everything was thrown around, disorganized, almost as if someone had rummaged through it in a hurry or with disdain. What I saw there did not seem like abandonment due to illness but due to neglect. There was something that didn't add up. Would he have left everything like this? Something told me that mess hid much more than sloppiness. I found a blue folder, forgotten under the bookshelf. Inside and signed contracts, incomplete drafts, returned letters. It felt like a deliberately dismantled puzzle. I started marking everything that seemed out of place, noting it in a small notebook. It was like investigating a silent crime, a pain no one saw. And the more I poked around, the more I realized. Mark would not have left his world like this, unless something very wrong was happening. Nothing matched the son I knew. I continued my search through the apartment and was drawn to a box at the back of the closet. When I opened it, I found dozens of receipts. Jewelry stores, expensive restaurants, tickets to resorts, all dated during the months Mark was hospitalized. All in Jennifer's name. My stomach churned. How could she spend so much while he wasted away in a hospital? It was as if she was celebrating his absence, as if his illness was her freedom. I gathered the papers, putting them in chronological order. The amounts were exorbitant. Designer dresses, spa days, luxury dinners. Signs of a life she couldn't afford alone, and that Mark would never have encouraged at that time. I felt a silent fury grow inside me, not for myself but for him. For everything he suffered without knowing he was being betrayed. That was more than cruelty. It was perversion. With each new receipt, Jennifer's image as a dedicated wife crumbled before me. It wasn't neglect. It was premeditation. I called the bank to confirm some details and heard back. Additional card in the name of Jennifer Lawson Rowe, with frequent use in the last 3 months. My son was dying and she was living as if she were single and rich. I felt betrayed by her, but also by my own naivete. Every amount was a stab in my son's back. I took a deep breath and dialed her number. Jennifer answered as if nothing had happened. Sweet voice, polite tone, as if she didn't know what I would talk about. When I mentioned the expenses, the silence on the other end was quick, followed by a disguised laugh. You're exaggerating, Elizabeth. I just tried to keep to a routine. That made me shudder. Coldness, cynicism, a total absence of regret. But I was no longer there to hear excuses. I continued firm, listing the receipts, the expenses, the statements. Her mask began to fall. When I mentioned the possibility of involving lawyers, her tone changed. She was silent for a second, then replied, "You don't have that right." Little did she know I had much more than a right. I had evidence, pain, and a new purpose. The woman on the other end of the line was no longer my daughter-in-law. She was a declared enemy. I hung up trembling, not from fear but from indignation. The image of Mark in that bed would not leave my mind, and now it was as if he was asking me for justice with his eyes closed. I gathered all the documents and organized them into folders. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a woman ready to unearth the truth. And Jennifer, without even knowing it, was already losing much more than control. Her smile froze when I mentioned the word lawyers. I decided she wouldn't see another penny. I returned to the hospital the next day, this time to see him for the last time. Mark's body was in a cold room, covered by a white sheet that could never hide who he was. I approached with slow steps, feeling an emptiness fill the space in my chest. I touched his hand, now lifeless, and remembered the baby I cradled. The boy who ran through the house with bare feet and dreams in his eyes. The tears came strongly, not just for his death, but for all he never lived. I asked for some time alone with him. I sat by his side, stroked his hair, and spoke as if he could still hear me. I recalled our moments, the advice I gave that he pretended to ignore, the hugs he always accepted in silence. I saw there not only a son but the most vibrant part of me now saying goodbye. The world seemed far away, and in that room it was just the two of us again. A last farewell between mother and son, sealed by a love that will never cease. As I left, I asked to speak with the nurse who had cared for him in his last weeks. She recognized me with a look full of sadness and relief. She told me that Mark was a quiet patient, but he always asked if someone would visit him. And that, despite the pain, he never stopped asking about Jennifer. He waited for her every day, the nurse said, and that tore apart the little that remained whole inside me. That was the farewell I never imagined. I sat with the nurse for a few more minutes, and the more she spoke, the more a portrait of abandonment formed. Jennifer never showed up even once. Not to sign papers, not to accompany him, not to say goodbye. While Mark wasted away, she disappeared from his world without a trace. And that, to me, was more cruel than any financial betrayal. I asked if anyone else visited him. The answer was short. Only you. I left that hospital with the weight of the world on my shoulders. How could someone be so absent, so indifferent to the pain of their own husband? I got in the car and cried as I hadn't cried since I lost Mark's father. But in that pain something new grew. A thirst for answers. Jennifer hadn't just disappeared. She had let Mark die in solitude. And now I could no longer ignore the questions forming within me. I returned home determined to find any clue that would help me understand. I went straight to his office, where the pain still resided in every corner. Among books and unfinished projects, I began to open drawers and folders, carefully and cautiously. I saw notes, drawings, paused contracts, but then I found a small locked box, hidden behind the bookshelf. My heart raced. I took an old key from the desk and tried it. It opened. He asked about her every day. The box contained more than I expected. Letters, bank records, and a small USB drive. I started reading the letters. Some were drafts written by Mark, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know how. In one of them he wrote, "I feel like I'm being used. I don't know who she is anymore." My breath caught. That was the first concrete sign that something deeper had happened. He was suspicious. I opened the USB drive on my notebook and found folders with scanned documents. Bank movements, screenshots of messages, invoices in Jennifer's name. Everything organized by dates and categories. It was as if he was assembling a dossier, even sick, even fragile. Mark had realized, too late, that he was being deceived by the one he trusted most. That changed everything inside me. I realized that what I called abandonment was just the surface. What lay behind it was a cold, calculated plot, leaving no room for doubt. Jennifer was not just negligent. She was cruel, intentional, calculating. And my son, even at the end, tried to gather strength to leave a trail. A silent plea for justice. Now that plea was mine. And I wouldn't leave it unanswered. Among papers and dust, I found the first sign of betrayal. She wasn't just absent. She was cruel. With the USB drive in hand, I spent hours reviewing every document Mark had saved. There was something almost desperate in the way he archived everything, as if his last battle was to prove the truth before it was too late. The spreadsheets were well organized, with comparisons between money inflows and outflows, and extremely high expenses that would never coincide with his reality in that state. Jennifer had transferred money to her own accounts, made luxurious purchases, and even suspicious donations. All with passwords and authorizations that clearly did not come from him. By cross-referencing the data with the receipts I had already found, the line of fraud became clear. It started with small expenses, but as his health declined, her spending increased. Plane tickets, purchases in luxury stores, and transfers to third parties formed a trail of blatant embezzlement. Every statement silently said that Mark was stolen from by the woman he trusted with his life. And now I carried the mission of justice. Mark's words echoed in my mind. I don't know who she is anymore. My heart ached, but my reason grew firm. This was no longer just a mother's pain. It was an investigation. Jennifer not only abandoned him, she slowly dismantled him, draining his dignity along with the money he fought to earn. And if she thought no one would notice, she was deeply mistaken. I saw before my eyes the real reason she disappeared. Every statement was proof of destruction. I knew I couldn't go on alone. I got in the car and drove to the base where Richard Hayes, my former commander, still worked as a civilian advisor. He was a man I respected with all my convictions, firm, loyal, and with a keen nose for injustice. When I showed him the documents, he barely blinked. He read in silence, analyzing each page with surgical precision. When he finished, he simply said, "Are you ready for war, Colonel?" I nodded, and I saw in his eyes the same flame that ignited in me. "We're going to take her down," he stated, with the certainty of someone who had fought many battles and won them all. We left the office with a plan. Richard knew lawyers, prosecutors, judges, everyone who could move mountains when they had the right facts in their hands. This ceased to be personal. It was now a mission of honor. For Mark, for me, and for all the invisible victims of women like Jennifer. We agreed that I would gather all the data and he would activate the right contacts. He would handle the legal procedures, while I continued investigating the possible ramifications of the scam. For the first time since Mark's death, I felt that I was not alone, and that there was a greater force guiding me towards the truth. Richard, with his experienced gaze, understood my silence and my urgency. We were on the same side like in the old days. He picked up the papers and said, "We're going to take her down." 2 days later, I was in a closed room with Richard and one of the best retired military lawyers he knew. We explained the case, showed the evidence, and actions began quickly. They filed an emergency request to freeze accounts and assets in Jennifer's name. Richard's phone didn't stop ringing. Each call was a piece that fit into the puzzle: officers, agents, contacts in the judicial system. Everyone collaborating with the urgency the situation demanded. I saw the power of truth move with precision. In a few hours, Jennifer's movements began to be tracked and blocked. An email from the bank confirmed. Account frozen. A notice to the brokerage firm. Assets under judicial review. An alert to the card administrator. Transactions denied. While she might have been relaxing in some spa, the world was beginning to close in on her. The network she once manipulated with confidence was now turning into a trap. I felt a mixture of relief and determination. It was just the beginning. There was still much to discover, much to prove, much to face. But now I had allies. And more than that, I had the truth as a weapon. Jennifer had no idea what awaited her. She played with the wrong man's life. And with the strength of the wrong woman. The war had begun, and she was already losing. His phone sounded like a weapon in war. Jennifer didn't know. But she was already being hunted. I went back to Mark's room with a strange feeling, as if he was still there trying to guide me. His laptop was on the table, and when I turned it on I had to take a deep breath. I typed the passwords he always used for his creations, and to my surprise it still worked normally. Folders named with months and acronyms indicated there was more than just memories there. I entered one called Personal, where I found diary entries. Mark wrote sincerely, unburdening himself as he never had with me. "She says it's all in my head," he noted in one of the entries. "But it can't be. Something isn't right." I read more, feeling the weight of the loneliness he faced. "Maybe I'm going crazy," he wrote one night, describing how his suspicions grew every time Jennifer came home with vague excuses. That wasn't just sadness. It was fear. There were dates, times, names. He was starting to document everything. A spreadsheet with records of her calls, screenshots of messages, even scanned receipts. The coldness of the material contrasted with the evident pain in his words. Mark suspected, but seemed caught between the truth and the love he still felt. My son was sick, vulnerable, but still trying to understand what was happening. That wasn't paranoia. It was a cry. "Maybe I'm going crazy," he wrote. I continued cross-referencing information. I took one of his spreadsheets and compared it with the bank data we had already tracked. The discrepancy was absurd. Jennifer said she spent money on medication and nurses, but there were purchases from jewelry stores, trips, and parties. A note from her in a message said, "I need to visit my mother in the hospital." I went after that story. I located the civil registry and with Richard's help I discovered her mother had been dead since 2019. The feeling was like a punch to the gut. How many lies could fit into one person? I highlighted each piece of information in red, building a timeline that dismantled the version she told everyone. Jennifer didn't lie out of necessity. She lied by nature. And the worst part, she used illnesses, deaths, and charity as a shield for her own crimes. This wasn't just abandonment. It was manipulation with purpose. I kept investigating. I opened old files and found copies of contracts and emails. She had rented properties, transferred funds to accounts not in her name, all while Mark was receiving morphine in the hospital. Each lie uncovered left a trail of indignation in me. She plotted with precision. And if she had lied about her own mother, what else could she have hidden? I knew there was more. And I went after it. Her mother's surgery? She died years earlier. I did what I never imagined I would. I hired a private investigator. I gave him the information I had, and in less than 2 days he came back with something devastating. Jennifer had been married twice before. Both ex-husbands died after long periods of sudden illness. Both left estates. Neither of them had close family. And in both cases she disappeared a few months later, with everything she could take. I spoke with the widow of one of these men's brothers, who told me that Jennifer never showed up at the funeral. She used her maiden name, moved cities, and vanished when the resources ran out. Now everything made sense. She didn't choose Mark out of love. She chose him as another target. Each discovery pushed me closer to a cruel and inevitable truth. Jennifer did this methodically, and she had been doing it for a long time. I understood then that my son was a victim of something much greater than a failed marriage. He was the third in a sequence of fragile men she destroyed without a trace. Was this what awaited me? A court? A flight? A new identity for her? No, not this time. I had evidence, allies, and a mission. And she had nowhere left to hide. 2 previous stories, 2 vanished estates. She wasn't a widow. She was a predator. Richard took me to Edward Martinez, a respected lawyer known for his firm stance as a former JAG in the armed forces. As soon as I entered his office, I felt I was facing someone who couldn't be fooled by appearances. I handed him all the folders with evidence and summarized what we had discovered so far. He read in silence with surgical attention, noting details with a red pen. When he finished, he looked at me with a gaze that mixed indignation and strategy. She did this with coldness, he said, almost as if talking to himself. He opened new folders, pulled out legal books, and began to organize everything by type of crime. Fraud, misappropriation, concealment of assets, negligence. He said that, with the documents in hand, it would not only be possible to freeze assets, but to file a lawsuit for moral and material damages. His energy was contagious. For the first time, I didn't just feel pain, I felt strength. I was not alone, and justice now had a face and a voice. His experience made a difference from the very first minute. He knew exactly how to expedite processes, which judge to approach, which loopholes to close before she could escape. When we cross-referenced the data with Jennifer's other old cases, he smiled bitterly. We have a pattern of behavior. She will pay for every penny. And I knew at that moment that I was no longer just trying to understand what happened. I was fighting to correct it. He looked at the papers and said, "She will pay for every penny." With the support of Richard and Edward's team, we filed an urgent court order. The bank details, purchase records, evidence of omission, and history of abusive behavior formed a robust dossier. The judge received the material in the morning. Before sunset, we got a response. Accepted. Jennifer's assets were frozen, including accounts, properties, and investments. Neither she nor anyone connected to her could move a cent. I called Richard as soon as I found out. "We did it," he said on the other end of the line. It was strange to feel relief amidst sadness, but there was also a taste of belated justice. Jennifer didn't know yet what was happening. Maybe she was laughing, dining, spending as usual. But the world around her had already completely changed. And this time there would be no silent escape. I took a deep breath, feeling that time was starting to align. It wasn't revenge. It was reparation. And from then on, each day would be one more step towards the complete truth. I had started a war, and there was no turning back. Her assets were frozen before dinner. The next morning, the unexpected happened. The phone rang 3 times in a row. It was her. I didn't answer. Soon messages came, and the change in tone was so stark it was comical. The first was mocking. "Seriously? Are you really going to try and fight me?" The second, hesitant. "We can talk. It's all a misunderstanding." The third, in desperation. "You don't understand. I need this money." I read each one with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. She was beginning to understand that something was slipping out of her control. She was no longer the invisible wife, nor the woman who cried in front of strangers to gain empathy. She was an investigated person, a suspect, a villain exposed. And yet, she tried to approach as if she could still manipulate the narrative. But the masks had fallen, and I knew what to do with everything she was trying to hide. With Edward by my side, we responded officially through legal means. There would be no conversation. There would be no agreement. There was no more room for pretense. The only thing she would receive from me was the truth, written, documented, and irreversible. And this time, she would be the one to cry alone as Mark cried. With no one around. From mockery to despair in 3 messages. The war had officially begun. I returned to Mark's house with Thomas, his childhood neighbor who remained close even during my years away. He offered to help me clean, saying it was the least he could do for Mark. We started in the backyard, where dry leaves covered almost everything. Every corner brought a memory. Ball games, birthdays on the lawn, shared laughter. The silence was heavy, but Thomas's presence made everything less unbearable. While he swept near the fence, I started cleaning by the old hose. That's when I saw a small, colorful paper, wet and folded among the leaves. Carefully unfolding it, I recognized the childish handwriting. It was a drawing by Mark with a dedication that read, "For Mommy, the best in the world." The colors were faded, but the emotion was alive. That disarmed me. I sat on the ground and cried, not from weakness, but for all that time could not erase. Thomas looked at me in silence, respecting my moment. Then he helped me up and we continued room by room. Every object was a fragment of my son, and every gesture from Thomas was a reminder that Mark was loved, even when forgotten. Feeling this returned something I didn't even know I had lost. Humanity. Perhaps I wasn't fighting alone after all. And perhaps there was still beauty in carefully rebuilding what Jennifer tried to destroy. Among the leaves in the yard, I found a drawing of Mark as a child. While cleaning the office, I removed books from the shelf to reorganize. One of them fell to the floor, and from inside, a small aged leather-bound notebook slid out. I recognized Mark's handwriting on the very first pages. These were personal notes, more intimate than those on the laptop. Passages about his pains, his doubts, and especially about Jennifer. I read with teary eyes, each line like an unfulfilled plea for help. "She says it's all in my head." He wrote that phrase more than once, almost like a mantra of despair. "I don't know if it's me or if she's slowly erasing me," he wrote on another page. The pain mixed with lucidity. Mark tried to resist, but it was as if he was fighting against an invisible poison. And even on days when his body failed, his mind still recorded everything, as if he knew someone would need to know. I spent hours reading it. It was like talking to him, like hearing what was never said aloud. The dates matched the periods when Jennifer claimed to be taking care of him, when in reality she barely showed up. That gave me more strength, more conviction. That notebook was the truth he left behind, and now it was my mission to carry it forward. Mark wasn't just sick, he was being silenced. "She says it's all in my head." He wrote that more than once. In the following days, the neighbors started showing up. Evelyn brought cake. Thomas came back with tools to help fix the gate. An elderly couple from next door brought flowers. None of them knew exactly what had happened, but they all felt that something wasn't right. We shared stories, memories, and silences. In a short time, Mark's house seemed alive again, surrounded by care and presence. I realized that this neighborhood held more than just memories. It held solidarity. Every gesture was small, but full of intention. They started telling me how kind, helpful, reserved, but loved Mark was. And everyone, without exception, found Jennifer's sudden disappearance strange. "She always seemed to be away," Evelyn said. Those words, coming from all sides, confirmed that my intuition was never wrong. The pain was still my companion, but now I shared it with people who knew my son's light. That made everything more bearable. I began to understand that justice is not just a legal process. It's also about restoring dignity to memory. And as much as the battle was just beginning, there was already a new strength within me. I was not alone, and that changed everything. Perhaps I am not so alone in this battle. It wasn't just for Mark. It was for all mothers who lost without answers. It was Edward who called me, in the middle of a quiet afternoon, with a new revelation. His voice was tense, straightforward. "She filed a claim for Mark's life insurance the day after his death." For a second, the ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. I knew Jennifer was cold, but I never imagined her haste was so calculated. The policy had been purchased months earlier, with very high values, and listed only her as the beneficiary. We requested the official documents from the insurance company and, with the lawyer's authorization, received copies of everything. There it was, with date, time, and signature. Jennifer requesting immediate payment of the insurance, even before the death certificate was finalized. The coldness of the gesture nauseated me. She didn't cry. She didn't visit. But she anticipated death as if counting the minutes to profit from it. It was more than greed. It was inhumanity. I called Richard immediately afterwards, unable to contain my anger. She had already contacted the insurance company the day after his death. Knowing this, I needed to dig deeper. I went back to Mark's computer and opened archived messages from an app he used. I discovered conversations between Jennifer and a certain Alicia. Intimate, sarcastic, immoral. They exchanged jokes about Mark's condition, as if he were just an obstacle to her plans. "He's still breathing," Jennifer wrote, accompanied by laughing emojis. I felt disgust. Pure and undeniable disgust. The messages were more than cruel, they were camouflaged confessions. "After this, freedom and travel, my friend," another said. I saved everything. Every screenshot was a sentence. Edward analyzed the content and said they would be essential evidence in court. Now we had a complete picture. She wasn't just an absent wife, but a woman who mocked the pain of the one she claimed to love. Jennifer wasn't just cruel. She was dangerous. I held Mark's notebook, the same one I had found days earlier, and understood that he might have known somehow that the truth would come out. And now it was about to be revealed. Her messages with a certain Alicia were pure cruelty. With all the documentation gathered, we sat down again with Edward. He divided the dossier into categories: emotional fraud, financial embezzlement, concealment of assets, attempted undue benefit. Images, screenshots, bank records, and the history of abuse. It was all there, organized like a map of evil. Edward was not just technical, he was ruthless. Every time he closed a folder, I saw conviction grow in his eyes. I showed him Alicia's messages. He read them, sighed, and for the first time seemed personally affected. "This goes to the top of the dossier," he said, closing the final folder firmly. We sat in silence for a few seconds. It wasn't easy to look at all that without feeling one's soul bleed. But there was also a new strength there. It was no longer a grief without answers. It was a fight with direction. "Now she will feel fear," he said. And I knew we were ready. He closed the folder and said, "Now she will feel fear." Jennifer was about to experience the weight of the choices she made. Not just in human justice, but before everyone she deceived. It was no longer just about Mark. It was about the family she deceived, the bonds she destroyed, the men she lost. Her silence would finally be broken, but not with excuses, with evidence. Evidence that screamed louder than any pretense. I returned home with the dossier in hand and my eyes fixed on the future. The final stage was approaching. And as much as my heart still ached, there was something greater at stake now. My son's name. His memory. His truth. I wouldn't let it be erased by a false signature and a fake smile. The time had come. Jennifer would have to look at me. And at everything she tried to bury. It was time for the final confrontation. The courtroom was silent when Jennifer entered, wearing a light-colored blouse and the same blasé look she always used to manipulate others. She sat calmly next to her lawyer, without even looking at me. I, on the contrary, held each page of the dossier with the firmness of someone carrying not only evidence but memories. When I stood up to testify, my steps were guided by all the sleepless nights, by all the silence Mark endured. I looked directly at her as I spoke. I told what I discovered, what I read, what I saw. I showed the receipts, the messages, the bank statements, the contradictions. Jennifer smirked at first, trying to sustain the farce with irony and superiority. But just 3 pages were enough for her demeanor to begin to change. The color drained from her face, her gaze faltered. And then before the last projected message, she lowered her head. She tried to laugh. But the mask fell. Edward presented the evidence clearly, point by point, without exaggeration, without pauses. And then he asked for authorization to display the messages exchanged with Alicia. All recorded, dated, and contextualized. The screen lit up in the middle of the room. Harsh, mocking, cold words. People in the plenum held their breath. I even saw her lawyer disconcerted. The judge interrupted the presentation, visibly affected by the evidence. Jennifer tried to hide her face, but it was too late. The people watching now knew. The smiles, the expenses, the abandonment. Everything was exposed. It was impossible to deny what was there, line by line, image by image. Mark's name was being cleared before everyone. And that was bigger than any financial reparation. It was moral justice. and it hurt more than any sentence. The social media images froze the room. Jennifer was called to speak. She slowly rose, trembling, and tried to argue. She used phrases like, "I was misunderstood, and he knew I loved him." But the room was already fed up. No one believed her anymore. Not even her own voice sounded convincing. Edward didn't need to refute her. The documents had already spoken for themselves. The judge watched her with a hard, impassive expression. Then, in a silence that weighed more than shouts, the judge merely nodded to adjourn the hearing. She didn't need to raise her voice or elaborate. What she didn't say was more eloquent than any speech. That was the end of the game for Jennifer. An end without a stage, without control, without a favorable audience. And I, standing, saw the woman who destroyed my son finally surrounded by the truth. The judge didn't need to say much. Her look was already the sentence. Jennifer left with slow steps, her eyes downcast, her face pale. None of the masks she created managed to protect her from that moment. And there were no excuses, no reactions, no hands extended to comfort her. She left alone, just as she left Mark. But this time it was different. This time everyone saw. This time the lie ended. I walked to the door with a calm I never imagined feeling. It wasn't victory. It was justice. And that's what Mark deserved. Jennifer walked through that door without a scent, without an alibi, and without the control she always thought she had. I didn't hate her. I just observed. Because she had already lost what she valued most, the power to deceive. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would return her to the place of manipulation from which she came. Jennifer left, but not with dignity. She left with shame. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.